Hello again, and welcome to the second part this time of our series on making traffic calls and operating radio in airspace in ArmA 3, particularly for the 15th new realism unit. In this part, we're going to talk about doing traffic calls in the towered environment where there is actually a tower controller present. That'll be played by me, and hopefully we'll also have some perspectives from Maj Gage, who is in his UH-1 down there and has graciously agreed to be our traffic for this. So we'll be running through a couple scenarios, and I'll try to explain as we go what is being said and why this is different within a towered context from the non-towered context that we talked about previously on uncontrolled airspace. So we'll get right into it.
Gravia Tower, training 400 rotary ramp, requesting taxi pack, remain in the pattern.
Training 400, Gravia Tower, runway 4 right, taxi via Bravo 2, runway 4 left, Charlie, enter runway 4 left, hold short, runway 4 right.
Bravo 2, 4 left, Charlie, enter 4 left, hold short, 4 right, training 400.
See, he didn't have to request any startup or anything like that from me because he is in a non-movement area. He's not on a taxiway or somewhere else where he's going to interfere with other people by starting up his engine. He just needs to make sure his aircraft area is clear. In his taxi request, he's called me to just request what his eventual intention is, which is departure, or excuse me, it's remaining in the pattern for this. I take upon myself the responsibility of assigning him a taxi route and a departure point to use, in this case runway 4 right. I've also given him specific runway clearances. Anytime somebody moves onto a runway or crosses a runway, whether it is in use or not, there has to be a runway crossing or hold short instruction. And you can only give one crossing clearance at a time. So in this case, my instruction to him was to enter runway 4 left and hold short of runway 4 right, because he's going to be taxiing from Bravo 2 onto runway 4 left, down to Charlie, and then to 4 right. So he needs to enter 4 left to get there, even though that's not in use. I still have to give him that entry clearance. And once he gets down there, he'll be operating off of 4 right. A good tower controller will notice when somebody gets down there, and they'll give them their takeoff clearance sort of as it looks like they're ready from the tower's perspective. But for now, I'm going to just let this proceed as if I haven't noticed him, or I'm busy with something else, or maybe something else in the airspace that's captivating my attention. And I'm going to be waiting for somebody to tell me that they're waiting for something from me, which he should do in a moment. Meanwhile, I'm scanning my airspace and making sure everything is clear. Airspace is clear. Everything generally looks good.
Gravia Tower, training 400, holding short, 4 right.
Training 400, Gravia Tower. Make left traffic, runway 4 right. Winds calm, runway 4 right clear for takeoff.
Left traffic, runway 4 right, clear for takeoff, training 400.
And that's a full, easy takeoff clearance for him to remain in the pattern. I've given him a specific instruction to make left traffic, and he has made sure to read that back to me. Any specific instructions, any runways being used in a clearance, and the actual clearance, in this case a clearance to take off, those are all read back to the controller by the pilot. Other things, such as the winds or any traffic advisories, any other general information that I might be passing to him as part of that clearance, does not need to be read back. However, any instructions, any runway mentions, and the actual instruction to take off, that stuff needs to get read back to me, as it is with other things, like the taxi route or any other clearances that I might be giving him. As he lifts out, we're again going to pretend that I'm really an inattentive controller, or I've got other things going on, and he's going to continue his traffic pattern. I haven't told him anything about when to call me or what he should be doing to communicate with me during his traffic pattern. So as he goes, he's probably going to be thinking, when does this guy really want to know where I am? Well, when you're in a non-towered context, as we talked about last time, most aircraft will make it a safety point to call at midfield downwind when they're abeam the tower and headed on their downwind leg back towards the numbers end of the runway. This is a good practice if you haven't been told anything else by the tower controller to just continue your pattern until you get to that point, and then the tower controller will direct you appropriately once you've prompted them with that call. He's coming down, he's wondering when I'm going to want to talk to him, and he should call me momentarily as he comes abeam the field.
Carbia Tower, training 400, midfield downwind.
Training 400, roger, call final.
Training 400.
And with that, I've just realized, okay, he didn't get an instruction from me, and I need to tell him when to call me back so that I can give him his next clearance or instruction or next pay attention to him. This is largely at a controller's discretion. They may say call base, they may say call final, they may say call at a particular point. I can give him a landmark, for instance, to call if he's crossing that, say if he's transitioning the field overhead or something like that. In this case, I've told him to call final. There's nothing else in the airspace, so I don't have to worry about him conflicting with somebody coming up to the runway. So if he just calls me when he's on final, that gives me adequate warning to give him his landing clearance. Like he started his base turn, and quite correctly, he has not reported his base turn or anything. I told him to call me back on final. I don't want to hear from him between now and then unless there's a problem. If he calls me between now and between when I gave him that instruction and when he comes onto his final turn, I'm going to assume that there's something wrong or he didn't hear me because he's not following that instruction.
Carbia Tower, training 400, on a runway 4 right, low approach.
Training 400, winds calm, runway 4 right, cleared low approach.
Runway 4 right, cleared, low approach, training 400.
See, he's requested one of the three things that he can do on the runway from me. You can either do a low approach like this, you can do a touch and go, or you can do a landing. And having requested a specific one, I will clear him for a specific one. Those would either be verbiaged as low approach, touch and go, or landing. Or excuse me, to land would be the phrase that a pilot would typically call in with. They'd say, final runway 4 right to land. If they don't specify, then I can clear them for the option, which gives them the option of doing all three. I've sort of made sure that that area is clear, the runway is clear, and they're able to use either of those tools as they wish, whether they want to go back up in the air or stay on the field. I just watch what they're doing and figure it out from there. I see he's completed his low approach, he's off the numbers end, I'm going to give him an instruction to proceed. Training 400, continue left traffic, call turning base.
Left traffic, call base, training 400.
And with that, I've given him the last instruction, the last communication that we need to have for a while. He can save himself a lot of verbiage now because he doesn't need to call any other traffic legs, he doesn't need to call midfield downwind, he doesn't need to call his crosswind leg or anything silly like that. He can just proceed on his traffic, continue looking around for other aircraft, and I can do whatever I'm doing. If I have other aircraft to control, I can get back to that and not worry about him until either something goes wrong and he calls me out of the blue, or he calls me turning his base leg. As a reminder, up there is the crosswind leg that he was just moving across. He's now on his downwind leg, and when he comes across towards the runway, that'll be his base leg before his final leg. Were he to continue past the threshold and not land, then he would be moving on the upwind leg, as that's called, once it continues. Or if he wasn't landing at all, if he didn't descend out of the pattern and he just continued, that would be an upwind leg. Okay, as he comes around his base turn in a moment, then you should hear him call me. I just need to make sure that the airspace he's going to be in and the runway he's going clear, and I can give him his landing clearance direct from there. He doesn't need to, and really shouldn't say anything back to me after reading that back. He shouldn't call finally, he shouldn't call on the deck or anything like that. He should just continue to fly his aircraft and deal with the critical phase of flight that is landing without
Bravo Tower, training 400, turning base, runway 4 right to land.
having to worry about it.
Training 400, winds calm, runway 4 right, clear to land.
Runway 4 right, clear to land, training 400.
And with that, he's done talking to me until he's actually firmly on the deck. He does not need to call anything else, and if he does say anything else, if he calls his final leg or something like that, my assumption is going to be that he hasn't heard my landing clearance, and I'm just going to give him the same landing clearance and kind of wonder what might be going wrong with his radio or something. If all goes right, he doesn't call, he continues to fly the aircraft, and he just deals with his landing without the distraction of having to reach for his radio button and actually say anything. And as he lands, I'm not going to say anything either. He's just going to continue to do what he does until he's clear of the runway. Again, acting as if I'm a busy tower controller or an inattentive one, just so that you get some exposure to what that's like, and a pilot having to sort of remind the controller at various points where that aircraft is and what they might be needing next. Because just in case the controller isn't paying really good attention, it's a good idea to have that as a tool in your pocket so that you know what to say hey, I'm here, I'm waiting for you.
Bravo Tower, training 400, clear 4 right at Alpha for taxi to rotary ramp.
Training 400, rotary ramp, back taxi runway 4 left to Bravo 1, enter runway 4 left.
Left to Bravo 1, enter 4 left, training 400.
And with that, because I have to use this runway as a taxiway, again, because this field is very strange that way, we have this closed runway that we use as a taxiway, I still have to give him an entry instruction or a crossing instruction for that runway. And he has read that back to me as part of his taxi clearance back to the ramp. I could give him a much more general taxi clearance, you'll hear that in other segments of this video, but for now, that's a specific taxi clearance that you might get at a larger airport or one that happens to be busy and restricted in where people can go. He doesn't need to say anything else after that point. I have instructed him to go to the ramp and how to do it, and he has basically all the free movement space in the world to complete that task. He could taxi as I instructed him, and once he gets off of the taxiway and he's actually on the ramp, he's no longer in an area that's controlled by me as the tower controller. The non-movement areas, aka those that are not taxiways or runways, if you see on here, that ramp area, named the rotary ramp, the FBO area up the end of Alpha, or the parade deck, anything else, anything that's not an actual labeled taxiway or runway is a non-movement area. And he has free reign to pretty much do whatever he wants except really depart the field or land at the field at those without talking to me. Startup, movement on non-movement areas, all of that, he's good to do all of it as he wishes. And he only needs to call me from there when he intends to enter my controlled area. It would be him lifting off from a non-movement area into my airspace, or him moving onto a movement area such as a taxiway or a runway. And that will conclude this segment, which is the basic pattern traffic calls of an aircraft with a towered controller. Okay, now for the second segment of our video, which will be focusing a lot more on proactive controlling and some different features that will happen when aircraft exit or enter airspace. They'll still have fairly simple requests, but some of the instructions may be a little bit different, and I'm going to try to stay on top of what our pilot is doing a little more this time so he doesn't have to prompt me so much. This is sort of a less busy and fairly attentive controller functioning rather than the last time where I was really waiting for him to tell me a lot of things.
Bravia Tower, training 400 at the rotary ramp, requesting taxi for departure to the east.
Training 400, Bravia Tower, runway 4 right, taxi via Bravo 2, runway 4 left, Charlie. Enter runway 4 left, hold short 4 right.
Runway 4 right via Bravo 2, 4 left, Charlie. Enter 4 left, hold short 4 right, training 400.
And again, I've given him a specific entry instruction for the 4 left, 2 right surface because that is closed but still a runway, and I need to clear him onto that. However, there is also a hold short that I needed to give him for 4 right so that he doesn't just enter into the active runway without clearance and have an incursion like that. So I've given him both the entry instruction for 4 left and the hold short instruction for 4 right in his taxi route, and he's read that back to me, as well he should. And I see him beginning his turn there, so I'll call him now.
Training 400, eastbound departure approved, winds calm, runway 4 right, cleared for takeoff.
Eastbound departure, runway 4 right, clear for takeoff, training 400.
And that's all that needs to be said there. I've now verified the airspace and the surface is clear. He's going to use that runway, and I've cleared him to do so and then proceed on his departure heading. So he is going to do that exactly as I have instructed him, and he doesn't need to call me during this entire process. It's incumbent on me to know when he's leaving my airspace, when he's getting out of the area, or when something else needs to happen, unless he calls me back with a specific request. In this case, as planned, he should just be heading out to the east. In the real world, most tower controllers own an area 5 miles away from the tower in a circle. With ArmA, that's a little more constrained because it's just a smaller area to work with. But when I see he's moved away a bit, we'll call him.
Training 400, you're leaving my airspace, frequency change approved.
Training 400, switching to 95.
And he's told me where he's going in case I need to find him. That's kind of a helpful thing sometimes, especially if there's a departure frequency or another frequency that an aircraft has to transition next. So calling my airspace something like 3 kilometers out from my field, he's now left that. He should be turning back inbound shortly, and we should have some further communication from him as he does so.
Bravia Tower, training 400 is 3 kilometers east of the field, inbound for pad work.
And so he's called, so I'll give him a specific instruction in how to join the pattern since he's coming from that side of the field.
Training 400, Gravia Tower, cross midfield, join downwind, left traffic, runway 4 right, call turning base.
Cross midfield for left downwind, runway 4 right, all base, turning 100.
That's a good readback. I've given him specific instructions, so he has specifically read those back to me. And as I'm the tower controller, I'm going to be looking for him out there to the east, making sure that I get a track on where he is. There he is coming towards the field right now, overhead. He's going to cross significantly over the pattern at the midpoint of the runway, roughly, so that he doesn't interfere with any traffic that would be landing, taking off, or doing a low approach on that runway. Once he gets over to the other side, he'll do what's called a teardrop join, where he joins into the downwind of the pattern. But he doesn't need to call me because I've specifically only asked him to call when turning base. I'm aware of what else is going on in the airspace. I don't need his calls. If I wasn't so sure, if I had some other things going on, then I might not give him that instruction. I may say call joining, or I may say call at this landmark, or call proceeding overhead the field, something like that. If I wanted to have an additional reminder from him at some point, I could request that, but in this case, because I have a very light traffic situation right now, all I need him to do is tell me when he's calling base so I can give him his clearance for landing or doing a low approach or touch and go or whatever it is that he may be requesting at that point.
Bravia Tower, training 400, turning base, runway 4 right.
Training 400, Gravia Tower, wind calm, runway 4 right, cleared for the option.
Runway 4 right, clear for the option, training 400.
And this is, in this instance, he has not given me a specific intention of what type of runway interaction he wants to do. So by clearing him for the option, I've given him the choice of doing all three. He could do a low approach, he could just continue in the pattern, or he could do a touch and go, or a full landing, full stop landing. Looks like he's lifting out again. Okay. Training 400, Gravia, continue left traffic, advise intentions when able.
Training 400, left traffic would like departure to the west.
And he specifically said now he wants to leave my airspace in the other direction, about to the west of here.
Training 400.
Training 400, you're leaving my airspace, frequency change approved.
Training 400, switching.
Now he's no longer my responsibility, he's out of my area, and not conflicting with anything else within my airspace. There is nothing else, so that makes it very easy for me to deconflict as a tower controller. We'll give it a minute, and then he should be coming in from a slightly different direction with a different request.
Bravia Tower, training 400 is 3 kilometers to the southwest to land.
Training 400, Gravia Tower, make straight in, runway 4 right.
Straight in, runway 4 right, training 400.
And with that, he's going to have a very easy time coming into the runway. I know he wants to land because he did just request that from me, and I don't want to have him burden himself with having to do some weird loop around the field, join from another direction. He's already pretty much lined up with the runway, so I can get him coming straight in on it, and when I see him getting closer, I can give him his landing clearance. Everything looks clear, airspace looks clear, I see him, we're good to go.
Training 400, winds calm, runway 4 right, cleared to land.
Runway 4 right, clear to land, training 400.
And with that, again, nothing else needs to be said until he's fully on the deck. In this case, though, again, being a proactive controller this time, I'm going to give him his runway exit and taxi instructions while he's still rolling out on this runway. Once he's clearly controlled his landing and he's done with that critical phase of flight, I can give him his instructions, and he should just be able to follow them without having to stop or alert me to the fact that he's waiting for me or anything. It's again just a courtesy thing that controllers will often do. Training 400, exit left when able, enter runway 4 left, taxi back your discretion to the ramp.
Left 1 able, enter 4 left, taxi to ramp, training 400.
Note that he has read back to me the runway entry instruction that I gave him for the 4 left, 2 right surface that he's getting onto right now. If I did not give that to him, then he would call me holding short of that runway there and would say holding short 2 right or holding short 4 left, and that would be a prompt for me where I would have to give him a crossing or entry instruction. Whenever you're approaching a runway, there's a tower controller and you have not been cleared to enter or cross that surface, always ask. And again, I've given the Major specific instructions to taxi to the ramp. His discretion. He could have used, he could have come further down and used Bravo 2. I don't know why he would, but he could if he wanted to. If he felt that was a better access to his spot, then yeah, he could do that. I gave him the option because there's really nothing else on the field. Once he's off of the taxiway and he's no longer on a movement surface, he has no responsibility to talk to me whatsoever. And once he's on that ramp and spooling down, he's done. So that introduces some more proactive tower controller methods of them calling you or you call them, and some additional differences in exiting and entering the airspace, not just moving around in the pattern. That concludes our second segment. Stay tuned for the third. Okay, welcome back to the third segment of the video where we're going to be talking about helicopter departures. We're going to talk about them in the context of movement surfaces and non-movement surfaces. So for this segment, we're going to have our pilot depart from a movement surface, and then when he comes back into the airspace, he'll land on a non-movement surface. And here you'll hear some differences in how I handle those as a controller, but you as the pilot will often handle them in very much the same way. You still just give a simple request with intentions, and we go from there.
Bravo Tower, training 400 at rotary ramp, requesting departure to the east.
And I feel like expediting him. I don't want to have him go all the way down to that runway, so I'll give him right there at that taxiway intersection, the Bravo 2 taxiway intersection.
Training 400 Gravia Tower, intersection departure, taxiway Bravo at Bravo 2, taxi via Bravo.
Intersection departure Bravo at Bravo 2, taxiing via Bravo, training 400.
So that way he can just basically come straight off the ramp and come right up to that position. He's very close to that, so I can just give it to him directly.
Training 400 Gravia Tower, departure to the east approved, cross runway 4 right, above 100 meters, winds calm from the Bravo 2 intersection, clear for takeoff.
Low cross 4 right, above 100 meters, at Bravo 2, cleared for takeoff, training 400.
He's drifted from that a little bit, but that's okay. He gets to lift off now, and he's going to do what he can to ensure that he's above the altitude I've requested before he crosses that runway. That's a very common instruction that you'll have from tower controllers when there's an active runway in use and you do a rotary wing departure that crosses that runway center line. You'll tend to get specific crossing instructions like that. And we'll get that same thing on inbound when he comes back in. But for now, looks like he's headed out of my airspace. Training 400, you're leaving my airspace, frequency change approved.
Training 400, switching. Bravo Tower, training 400 is 3 kilometers to the east, requesting landing at the parade deck.
Ah, he wants to go to a non-movement area.
Training 400 Gravia Tower, proceed to the parade deck, cross runway 4 right, over the numbers, above 100 meters.
To the parade deck, we'll cross 4 right, over the numbers, above 100.
Okay, so he has been given a specific instruction by me. Again, he's just come in with his intentions. He hasn't said, I want to do this to join the pattern or anything like that that might hamper what I want to do with him or might have a preconception there. He's just said where he wants to go, and I've assigned him a way to get there. I want him to cross those runway numbers so that he is in the least possible place to conflict with other air traffic. And then he's basically just going to loop around and go up to the northeast end of the field where that parade deck is. That's right out past that white office building there. And that, you'll note, is not a movement surface. It's not a taxiway intersection. It's not a runway. It's not even really on the field. It's just adjacent to it, but it is in my airspace. So he's requested it from me, and I'm going to just basically advise him, that's up to you, bud. I don't control that area, but just tell me when you're not going to be up in my airspace anymore. And that's essentially what we're going to have here in a minute. And he's correctly gone over the numbers there. He's looping up towards that landing point. And once he gets a little closer there, you know what? Now it's pretty good, because he's deconflicted from the runway.
Training 400 Gravia Tower, landing at the parade deck is at your own risk. Gravia winds calm, call landing assured.
We'll call landing assured, training 400.
And that just tells him, not my area, you do you, but tell me when you're out of my airspace, when you're going to definitely be down on the deck. So he's going to go up there, he's going to look at his landing area, because it's up to him to make sure that it's clear now. and he's going to verify that he can land on it and that he will be capable of doing so. And when he goes to do that, then he should be giving me a call back.
Bravo Tower, training 400, landing assured.
Training 400, roger.
And that's literally the last thing I need from him on that. Okay, now our pilot should be departing again from that position, and he should be calling me with a request momentarily that I'll have to handle in much the same way because he's in a non-movement area.
Bravo Tower, training 400 at the parade deck, requesting departure to the west.
Training 400, Gravia Tower. Departure from the parade deck is at your own risk. Gravia winds calm. Call airborne.
We'll call airborne. Training 400.
Again, it's not my area. I can't clear him to take off from there, but he will call me once he's up.
Bravo Tower, training 400, airborne.
Training 400, Gravia Tower. Departure to the west approved.
Departure to the west, training 400.
And now he's up in my airspace. He is controlled by me. I'm just here to make sure that he's deconflicted from any other traffic in the airspace as he heads out. So in this case, our pilot will have slightly different intentions in a moment.
Bravo Tower, training 400 is turning back in, request landing at the rotary ramp.
Okay, he wants to come back here, so I'm going to put him right where he came from. Training 400, Gravia Tower, make straight into the Bravo 2 taxiway intersection.
Bravo 2, taxiway intersection, training 400.
So having been given that clearance, that allows him to expedite himself, and again, not have to deal with the runway surface at all. He's a rotary wing aircraft. There's nothing else that's going to conflict with him out here, so I can put him directly in to where he wants to be. I could clear him to land at the ramp if I wanted to, but say our procedure's a little different here, and just for safety, I want to make sure that he is on a movement surface when he's departing from that ramp area. I'll have him come out of the ramp to depart, as I did before, and in this case, I'll have him land on the movement surface and then move in to the ramp from there, having technically landed.
Training 400, winds calm at the Bravo 2 taxiway intersection, clear to land.
Bravo 2 intersection, cleared to land, training 400.
And because that is a movement surface, I do need to give him a clear instruction on landing. I need to clear him to do so, and I have done so, having verified that it is clear, the airspace is clear, everything looks good for him. And once he's basically down on that, then I can give him taxi instructions from there, which is going to be very easy because he's only going about 30 meters away. Very simple.
Training 400, taxi your discretion to the ramp.
Back to the ramp, 400.
And that concludes our last segment with rotary wing aircraft on operations and communications in a towered environment. We will have a short segment with some differences for fixed wing aircraft, especially in the military context, in just a second, but this concludes it for rotary wing aircraft. Okay, now for the last segment of our video on air traffic operations in a towered context, be exploring some of the more unusual differences that can occur with military fixed-wing aircraft versus rotary-wing aircraft. We talked about the basic traffic calls, and that stuff is pretty much standard across all aircraft. Whether they're rotary or fixed-wing, they can all follow that procedure. However, we did also talk about some differences that occur with rotary aircraft, where they can do departures and arrivals from places that are not movement surfaces on the field or near the field, and places that are movement surfaces but are not in fact a runway. Fixed-wing aircraft generally don't have that capability. However, they do have some more interesting things that they can do, especially military ones. Some of these procedures are geared towards certain aircraft in certain situations, including naval procedures such as a carrier brake, but a lot of these are also practiced on fields, both military and civilian military dual operated, for practice sake of the pilots. So two of the things that we're going to go through real quick are an unrestricted climb departure, which is a very common feature for high performance jets during trainings or operations, and the carrier brake procedure. This is a procedure that is not often used in our current configuration in the 15th Mu Realism unit, but it is something that is a good thing to know because it does depict some of the different ways that procedure is done, and you can see how things are more focused on brevity and operations in a much tighter airspace with much less communication. So with that, again, we have Major Gage working with us in a fixed-wing aircraft, this time an AV-8B carrier that is somewhere over there on the Charlie ramp. And he'll be calling us up in a moment to request his unrestricted climb departure.
Bravia Tower, training 400 is off Charlie. Request taxi for departure to the west. Request unrestricted departure.
Training 400, runway 4 right, taxi via Charlie. Cross runway 4 left, hold short 4 right. Stand by on your request.
Runway 4 right, via Charlie. Cross 4 left, hold short, 4 right, training 400.
There's some interesting elements that he's requested from me there. He does want a departure to the west. However, what he's telling me with his unrestricted departure or unrestricted climb request is that he in fact wants to climb vertically out of my airspace instead of going laterally out of it. There's a bit of a difference with that. It happens very quickly with high performance aircraft, and for that reason, I'm going to have him switch frequency as soon as he's off of the field. You'll get that as part of his takeoff instructions in a second, and that will constitute his unrestricted climb departure. I have no other airspace above me, but right now I would be checking with departure controllers or center controllers above me to make sure they can accept him up there. For now, I just don't see anybody up there, so I can release him directly.
Training 400, unrestricted climb approved. Switch to tactical. Winds calm, runway 4 right cleared for takeoff.
Runway 4 right, clear for takeoff, unrestricted, switching, training 400.
I've cleared him for that unrestricted climb, and as part of that clearance, I've told him to switch to his tactical frequency at the same time. That way, he doesn't have to worry about pushing buttons while he's doing a very high G-force, high stress maneuver that's happening very quickly. He can instead depart the field and immediately be over to his tactical frequency. In fact, he's no longer required to be on my frequency because I've already switched him over. Of course, this does mean that I have to make sure that the airspace around him, over the runway and up in his intended area of departure, is clear, but with that, he should be good to go. So he's going to lift, gain his speed over the field, and then when he has enough airspeed, he's just going to tilt up and depart relatively vertically. And I've said all I need to say to him because he's no longer on my radio frequency. It's a very quick, very easy way to get high performance aircraft out of an airfield. He's now going to reposition his aircraft, and I'll talk a little bit about the carrier brake procedure that he's going to be doing momentarily. This is a little drawing of it that we have on our map here with my poor ArmA drawing skills. And this describes roughly what a carrier brake looks like. Because carriers have an angled landing deck, the actual ship heading would be about 9 degrees off of where the runway is, and he's going to simulate that just for practice's sake, with his initial point being a little angled off by about 9 degrees from where our runway heading is. He'll call me at an appropriate distance out on that initial as he's coming up to my airspace, and he will request the brake. This just tells me that he's not going to be doing a normal pattern join. He's not going to try to join midfield or be told to make straight in a normal fashion. He wants to do this with carrier procedure, which is perfectly fine. That can be done at a ground field and is often done at ground fields for practice sake. At that point, he's going to come in at about 300 meters, which comes out to about 600 feet above the field. And once he's directly overhead the field, he's going to call in the brake. At that point, he'll start slowing down. He'll dirty up his configuration with landing gear, flaps, tail hook, everything like that as needed. And he'll start bringing it back around and down to about 200 meters. Again, ArmA likes to do things in meters, so I have to convert things from feet to meters, which is inexact, but it works. A beam is a point level with the aft of where the ship would be, or in this case the runway threshold, going in the opposite direction. At this point he should be in landing configuration. I'm going to be checking him from the tower to make sure that appears to be the case, and at that point I will clear him to land. With a ship that goes a little differently, With a ship around here, once he comes around, he's going to be calling the ball and being talked in by the paddles controller, who is ensuring that he's actually on the correct path for a trap. For us, at a ground field, I give him a landing clearance at a beam, and that's the way that the FAA and the U.S. military has that work. So we should be getting a call from him shortly.
Bravo Tower, training 400, 4 kilometers to the southwest, requesting the break.
Training 400, Gravia Tower, runway 4 right, cleared into the break, report break.
Training 400.
See, there's very minimal communication with that type of procedure, and at this point he's just going to proceed in from his initial point where he's just called me, and he should be, there he is, he's coming over the field about 300 meters up, getting ready for the break. He's still moving relatively fast, but he's going to change that and start dirting himself up as he goes into the break.
Bravo Tower, training 400, in the break, 4 right.
Training 400, roger.
With that, you'll see him start to descend and come around, and he should dirty up his configuration. Yep, he's got gear down and flaps down, so he's looking good for the break and for his actual landing. A little bit as he comes abeam with the end of the runway, he'll call me again, and that'll be the last call between us.
Bravo Tower, training 400, to beam.
Training 400, winds calm, runway 4 right, clear to land.
4 right, clear to land, training 400.
And at that point, he has his landing clearance. It's even before the usual call your base or call your final point in a traffic pattern. This allows him to do the relatively complex phase of flight of attempting a trap or attempting a carrier flight profile like this on a ground field and landing the aircraft without having to worry about communicating with me. And in a slight edit to this, Major Gage is flying an AV-8B, which is vertical and near vertical takeoff and landing capable, so he can slow it down as much as he wants and make it as deliciously smooth as he wants without having to do it fast. For a full-size carrier aircraft, or excuse me, a non-vectored thrust carrier aircraft, this would be a bit of a different story.
Training 400, you can exit left at Charlie, cross 4 left, taxi your discretion on the ramp.
Enter 4 left, taxi to the ramp, training 400.
And with that, Major Gage can make a quick exit to his ramp. His last call for the day is done. That's it for us too, as we finish this series on pilot communications in the towered air traffic environment. I hope you've enjoyed. Stick around for whatever I come up with next. Thanks for watching.